Hi, I'm Mariska. At my sister's wedding, I wasn't seated, I was scanned past. Her boss looked right through me like I was the coat rack and said, "Impressive crowd." 590 people heard it. No one blinked. That night, I stayed silent. But a year later, in the exact same ballroom, I said one sentence. And the silence that followed? It wasn't mine anymore. Before we dive in, tell me this. Where are you listening from tonight? And have you ever been treated like you didn't exist? Drop a comment. I read everyone. I parked 3 blocks away. It wasn't because there wasn't valet. There was. Flashy, overstaffed, but I didn't want to see the look on the valet's face when I stepped out alone. No designer clutch, no glittering gown, just a simple navy dress and a leather coat I've had since grad school. The air still held that early spring chill, like winter hadn't gotten the memo. I wrapped my coat tighter as I walked down the cobbled sidewalk. The venue, a gleaming white building with tall glass panels, sat like a monument to wealth and curated appearances. Every guest stepping inside looked like they'd stepped out of a commercial, polished, expensive, happy. I wasn't invited formally. The wedding planner had accidentally left me off the mailing list. Amelie said it was just a mix-up, but you don't forget your only sister, not if you mean to include her. The staff at the entrance barely made eye contact when I gave my name. No welcome, no warmth. A young man with a clipboard simply blinked and moved aside. I walked in alone. Inside, soft string music filled the air. Candles flickered on every surface. Gold-trimmed table cards lined a mirrored wall, arranged alphabetically. Guests buzzed around, laughing, posing for photos, sipping champagne in tall flutes. I stood in front of the seating chart. My fingers skimmed the list. Amelie Carter? Brandon Hartwell? Names scrolled on, each with a corresponding table number, but not mine. I went through it twice, then a third time. I wasn't on it. Behind me, heels clicked, a confident rhythm I knew too well. My mother, Margot. "Darling," she squealed, at someone else. I turned. She was wrapping her arms around our cousin Eliza, kissing her cheeks like they hadn't just seen each other 2 days ago at the bridal shower. Eliza looked over at me awkwardly. Margot didn't. She never even glanced in my direction. I'd brought a small envelope. Inside was a vintage brooch Amelie used to borrow from me when we were teenagers, one she claimed she loved more than anything. I had it cleaned, wrapped in soft paper. I walked up to a staff member, a young woman with tired eyes, and said, "Can you make sure the bride gets this after the ceremony?" The woman nodded wordlessly and tucked it into her apron pocket. No one else saw. I didn't want them to. After that, I stood awkwardly near a marble column, trying not to look out of place, though I very clearly was. "Excuse me," a soft voice whispered behind me. It was a catering staffer, holding a tray of glasses. She leaned in discreetly. "There's a spare seat near the back, by the kitchen doors. You're welcome to take it." That's how I ended up sitting behind a massive floral pillar, half hidden by the display. The scent of fried hors d'oeuvres wafted in from the swinging kitchen door behind me. Every time someone walked past, the door flapped open, revealing the industrial glow of stainless steel and the clatter of pans. I could barely see Amelie's table from where I sat. I could hear laughter, clinking glasses, toasts being made. None of them addressed me. I was invisible. The speeches began. Lights dimmed slightly, and a man stepped up to the platform near the head table. Lennox Hartwell. I recognized him from magazine articles and LinkedIn profiles. Amelie's boss, a tech mogul in his 40s, sharp, slick, arrogant in that polished way only money could refine. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, raising a glass, "we're gathered here tonight to celebrate not just a beautiful couple, but a woman I consider one of the sharpest, most visionary minds I've ever worked with." Guests murmured in approval. My mother beamed at the table. Amelie reached for Brandon's hand. "She's relentless, brilliant, and—" He paused dramatically, letting his eyes sweep the room, "surrounded tonight by everyone who matters." Laughter, claps, even a few whoops. His eyes landed on me for half a second. Then just as quickly, they slid away, like I wasn't there. I didn't laugh. I stood up quietly, not dramatically, just upright. I wasn't going to let that line settle like fact. I wasn't going to sit by the kitchen like some forgotten +1. I didn't head toward the stage. I simply walked to the center aisle. All eyes turned. My heels clicked against the floor, just once, twice. Then I stopped. "You might want to remember who signed your first company's loan," I said. Calm, even, not loud. The silence that followed could have cracked glass. Lennox's smile disappeared. Amelie's fingers slipped from Brandon's hand. Margot looked like someone had slapped her with a church bulletin. They stared at me like I was a ghost. But it was too late. Everyone had heard. He stared at me like he couldn't quite place what century I belonged to. The laughter in the ballroom sputtered out. A few guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Then Lennox adjusted his tie, forced a tight smile, and chuckled like I'd just told an awkward joke. "Some people," he said, voice calm but sharp at the edges, "like to rewrite history." Nobody laughed. Not this time. I didn't wait for the music to kick back in. Amelie's fingers flicked subtly toward the DJ booth, and soon some mid-tempo jazz filled the room, like duct tape over a cracked mirror. I turned around and walked out, the hem of my dress catching the edge of the aisle runner. Outside the ballroom doors, the air was cool and smelled faintly of spring lilacs, but I wasn't really breathing it in. I moved past clusters of staff carrying trays, past a waiter who looked like he wanted to ask if I was okay, but thought better of it. I ended up near the side hallway, dim, lined with floor-to-ceiling windows. From there, I could see the ballroom in full light and sound, like a TV show I'd walked off of. I leaned lightly against the wall, arms crossed, and stared through the glass. Amelie had taken her place at the center of the dance floor. Lennox was right beside her, whispering something close to her ear. She didn't look surprised. She didn't even look mad. She just looked prepared. And that made something cold settle in my stomach. It hadn't always been like this. 5 months earlier, I'd been sitting in my tiny condo in Lancaster, the heat barely working, a throw blanket over my knees, sorting through a stack of unopened mail. It was one of those quiet Saturday evenings where the world outside moved on without you. I remember thinking I'd order Thai food later. Halfway through the pile was a thick envelope from BankVest Capital. I almost tossed it, thought it was junk, but it had my full name typed neatly on the front. I opened it without thinking, pulling out what looked like a routine annual loan statement. But then I saw the company name, LH Holdings, LLC. I frowned. That wasn't mine. I skimmed the letter. Principal disbursement, $350,000. Loan start date, October 18th, 4 years ago, and under borrower status, Mariska L. Calloway, former cosigner, status removed, 3 years ago. I dropped the paper and stared at it like it might explain itself. Then my father's voice came back, clear as ever, like he was sitting in that creaky kitchen chair beside me. "Help where you can, sweetheart, but get it in writing. Family love doesn't void legal obligations." I hadn't thought of that day in years, the day Lennox, still just Amelie's boyfriend back then, had come over looking like the world was about to swallow him whole. He sat at my kitchen table, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair, eyes glassy but determined. "I just need a little help to get through the last hoop," he'd said. "Investors love the concept, but the bank wants a cosigner with a solid record. You've always been steady." I was 28. I believed in Amelie's love for him. I believed he'd pay it back. And yes, he'd promised equity, 15%, he said. "You'll be in it with us. It'll be ours too." He called me our secret weapon. Back in the present, I sat down at the edge of a hallway bench and pulled out my phone. I dug up the old login to the BankVest portal, the one I'd bookmarked and forgotten about. It took 3 tries and a password reset, but eventually I got in. The dashboard loaded slowly. My eyes caught a note at the bottom of the loan file, time-stamped 3 years ago. Co-signer Mariska L. Calloway removed by board consensus. Equity share voided. I stared at it. Read it again. There was no board. Lennox had been the sole founder. The consensus was just him. And I? I'd been erased. I leaned forward, elbows on knees, my fingers locked together so tight the knuckles ached. It wasn't just betrayal, it was theft done in silence, with the kind of arrogance that assumes you'll never look. Back in the hallway, I stood and turned toward the window again. Amelie was still dancing. Lennox had slipped away from her side for a second, speaking to someone near the DJ. But Amelie, she stood in the middle of the room like nothing had happened. She lifted her head. Her eyes swept toward the glass. She saw me. She didn't smile. She didn't flinch. She didn't move. She just held my gaze for a breath too long, and then turned back to her guests with a light laugh I could almost hear through the thick pain. That's when I knew. It wasn't just him. She knew too. I didn't wait to see if Amelie followed. I already knew the answer. The ballroom doors closed behind me with a heavy thud that echoed louder than the music ever did. The hallway was dimly lit, and my heels clicked sharply against the polished floor, the only sound besides the muffled bass thudding through the walls. I kept walking until I reached the elevator, pressed the button, and stood there still in that dress, still wearing someone else's version of the evening. My hotel room welcomed me with silence. I slipped off my shoes and walked in like I was trespassing. The air had a chill, but I didn't reach for the thermostat. I just sat at the edge of the bed and stared at the small wedding favor sitting neatly by the pillow. Everyone got one. A square velvet box monogrammed with their initials, elegant, thoughtful, except mine. Mine had no initials, no trace, just a plain silver lid and a generic thank you card inside. My eyes flicked to the nightstand. There was another box, larger, with a creamy envelope resting on top. To our sponsors, thank you for believing in us. I reached for it, slowly, almost afraid of what I wouldn't find. The card listed names in looping calligraphy, a dozen sponsors, friends, mentors, people who barely knew them, I was sure. But my name? Not there. I sat back, fingers gripping the edge of the comforter. The room began to blur around the edges, like I was slipping underwater, and all I could hear was Amelie's laugh from earlier, spinning through the ballroom like she had everything she wanted. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees. That numb ache in my chest? It was growing teeth, and just like that, memory came knocking. 2 weeks earlier, I'd texted Amelie, trying to pin down details for the wedding weekend. Still working on it, just show up, she'd replied, like it was a casual barbecue, not the biggest day of her life. I'd let it go, chalked it up to her being stressed, but something felt off. 4 days later, Aunt Dee called. She's my dad's youngest sister, the only one in the family who ever noticed when I went quiet for too long. Her voice was low. I probably shouldn't, but I thought you should see this. Then she forwarded me an email chain. I tapped it open, heart thudding even though I didn't know why yet. It was from the wedding planner. Subject, final guest list approval. Midway down the thread, I saw it. My sister's name, bold and clipped. She's not on the final list. If someone from the company drops, we might need her to fill a seat. Backup body. Backup body. I read it twice, 3 times. The words didn't change. The implication didn't soften. Not family, not guest, not even human apparently. Just a placeholder, a bench warmer at her fairy tale. That phrase rang in my ears like a cruel nursery rhyme. My chest tightened, but not with sadness. This was different. This was sharp. I set my phone down slowly and let the silence build. I could feel every year, every moment where I'd let this happen. Let her take my sweaters, my shoes, my ideas in school, the credit for my internship lead. She'd always had a way of making me feel like I should be grateful just to orbit her spotlight. And I played along, until now. Back in the hotel room, I stood and walked to the suitcase I hadn't unpacked. My fingers moved slowly as I unzipped it. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, was a gift I'd brought for Amelie. A framed photo of the two of us, taken on her 6th birthday. She was grinning, frosting on her chin. I had my arm around her. Even then, I'd been trying to keep her steady. I stared at it for a long moment, then slid it back into the tissue and zipped the suitcase shut. I wiped off my makeup with steady hands, took my time removing the dress, folded it carefully. I wasn't angry in the way people scream or break things. I was something colder, calmer, like a still lake with something dangerous underneath. And I knew one thing for certain. Tomorrow, I wouldn't attend the brunch. I had a different plan. By the time sunlight bled through the curtains, my mind had already mapped every step of what I'd do next. There was no weight in my chest anymore, just a strange lightness, not the kind that comes with peace, the kind that arrives after you've finally accepted the truth and you're too tired to keep pretending it doesn't hurt. I slipped out of bed carefully, not wanting the crumpled sheets or faint floral scent of hotel soap to tether me back to last night. My bridesmaid dress, still folded over the chair, looked more like a discarded costume now. I didn't bother packing it. Instead, I put on black slacks, a simple dark blouse, and a coat that made no statement. No one should look at me and see someone seeking attention. I wanted to pass through the morning like smoke, silent, contained, and gone before anyone thought to chase it. Outside the ballroom, laughter spilled out, light-hearted and hollow, like party favors rattling in an empty gift bag. I paused, just out of sight, beside a marble pillar. Through the cracked door, I could hear my father's voice rise in a toast. To family, and to the daughter who made this day everything we dreamed. He meant Amelie, of course, the golden one, the chosen one. I let the moment breathe, then turned and walked the opposite way. Aunt Dee's room was 2 floors up. The hallway was still, but her door opened just after I knocked, like she'd been waiting. Her robe was tied at the waist, hair loosely clipped back, a mug already in hand. No words, just a tilt of her head inviting me in. We sat across from each other at the small round table. The coffee between us was lukewarm, but familiar. Aunt Dee never filled silence with fluff. She let it stretch, settle, and speak its own truth. That morning, I was grateful for that. "You didn't go to the brunch," she said eventually, her voice low, like a secret. "I'm not on the guest list," I replied flatly. She didn't argue. Instead, she reached into her purse and pulled out a plain white envelope. No names, no markings, just folded edges and quiet understanding. "They won't read it if it's from me," she said, sliding it across the table. I opened it. It wasn't just the seating chart, it was the final approved one. No backups, no penciled notes. My name wasn't there. There was a slot for Extended Family, row 3, but even that was filled with names I hadn't heard in years. I scanned every section. Nothing. Like I'd been erased from the guest list long before the first champagne toast. "Thank you," I said quietly, my voice almost catching. "For showing you still see me." Aunt Dee reached across and gently patted my hand. "You deserved better a long time ago. This was just the final straw. We didn't hug. We didn't cry. That wasn't our style. Instead, we sipped the last of the cold coffee and let the moment settle like dust after a storm." Before I left her room, I slipped the seating chart back into the envelope. Alongside it, I placed a folded copy of the email she'd forwarded me, the one Amelie sent to the planner. The line was still there, staring at me like a slap in print. "She's not on the final list. If someone from the company drops, we might need her to fill a seat." A backup body. I didn't bother freshening up. I walked through the lobby just as I was, calm, invisible. At the far end of the reception hall, they'd set up a small table labeled "Guest Memories, a Love Story." There were cards stacked neatly, pens arranged in mason jars, and a scrapbook in the center. Its cover was ivory with pressed gold lettering, "Amelie and Hayden, our journey begins." I flipped through slowly. Childhood photos, college years, their first apartment, a picture of Amelie holding her bridal gown like it was sacred silk, all framed in captions like "Forever starts here" and "She always believed in love." But the last page was blank, as if waiting. I reached into my coat and pulled out the printed page. On top, a line I'd typed the night before, in the early hours when clarity hits hardest. "Thank you for reminding me where I stand." Beneath it, taped carefully, was Amelie's email. I'd highlighted that one damning sentence in red. I didn't add my name. Didn't need to. I closed the book gently, smoothed its cover. Then I stood. Outside, the valet was already at the curb, holding the car door open like I'd never left. I stepped in, adjusted my coat, and looked straight ahead. "Drive," I said. And as the car pulled away from the hotel, brunch continued without a ripple, at least for a moment. By the time the first scream echoed from that ballroom, I was already 3 miles away. Sitting at a window-side table in a quiet cafe near Rittenhouse Square, staring into a cup of coffee that had gone cold without ever being touched. It was the kind of place people came to avoid being seen or to remember how to breathe. The soft hum of a jazz trio played over the speakers, and outside, sunlight sifted through the spring trees like it had no idea what kind of day it was. I pulled out my leather-bound journal and let it fall open to a blank page. I didn't lift the pen. My phone buzzed once, then again. By the 5th buzz, I flipped it over without looking. It buzzed a 6th time, 7th. On the 8th, I inhaled slowly, pressed play. Mom's voice, clipped, tight. "You embarrassed your sister, in front of family, friends. The venue staff said you made a scene." There was a pause, a sharp breath. "I thought we raised you better." The voicemail ended, but the phone kept vibrating. Another came through before I could toss it back in my bag. This time, it was Amélie. Her voice was sugary, fake sweet in that way I knew too well. "But you're really going to blow this out of proportion? I was joking, obviously." "Back up, body. It's an inside term, nothing serious. You're acting like I committed a crime." In the background I heard clinking glass, and then a male voice, Dad's. "She always ruins things. Always has." I blinked hard, refusing to let anything sting. Aunt Dee called, but I sent her to voicemail. I couldn't talk. Not yet. Instead, I watched the people around me. 2 tables away, a man was stirring his espresso slowly, watching the steam curl as if it told fortunes. There was something familiar about his profile, his posture, that crisp navy coat. He looked up and met my gaze, a slow, surprised smile. "Still writing?" The voice came back to me, lower than I remembered but calm, steady. Ethan, Amelie's old colleague, the one who used to stay late when we worked on that scholarship pitch, the one who never looked at me like I was second to anyone. I nodded slightly. "Trying to." He didn't ask to join me. He just picked up his cup and slid into the seat across from mine. "I read your piece," he said. "The essay in Civic Rise, about legacy and memory." My shoulders tensed. That piece was anonymous. "I knew it was about them," he added gently. We didn't talk much after that. He didn't ask questions. I didn't offer context. But when I stood to leave, he followed. We crossed Rittenhouse in slow silence, the kind that feels like understanding. When we reached the far path by the fountain, he said, "I left the firm 6 months ago." I looked at him, unsure why he'd share that. "There was talk, after you left. People noticed your name was missing from the final grant proposal, from the press kits, from everything." He looked at me then, eyes steady. "They erased you on purpose." I stopped walking. "I thought it was just the nonprofit thing," I whispered. Ethan shook his head. "It started before that. Internal memos, meeting notes. They'd credit Amélie alone, even when we all knew the ideas came from you." "And no one said anything?" "Some of us did, but her boss? He protected her, said you were too disruptive to be client-facing." I let out a dry, short laugh. "Disruptive, that's a new one." He didn't smile. "You weren't invisible, Mariska. You were a threat." That word, threat. It sank somewhere between my chest and spine, heavy, sharp. I nodded once and turned toward the avenue. We said no more. I didn't ask for his number. He didn't ask for mine. He just lifted his coffee cup in farewell, as if we both knew the next chapter didn't belong to shared walks or soft talk. Back in my apartment, the afternoon light had shifted. Shadows stretched across my hardwood floors, long and slanted. I kicked off my flats, sat down at my desk, and opened my laptop. There it was, the file named Project Her, my original proposal, the one Amélie and her boss had pitched with their names on it, the same proposal that had sparked the entire funding cycle. My hand hovered over the keyboard. I didn't open it yet. I stared for a long time at the blinking cursor on the file name. The email drafts were still in the saved folder. Every version I'd written and rewritten. I clicked one to founderherfoundation.org. Subject, just so you know who really built your flagship. I didn't sign it, not yet, but I added the attachment. Then I whispered, steady and low, just for myself, time to give them something to really be afraid of. And that night, I hit send to the one person who could burn it all down with a single click. By the time I closed my laptop that night, a chill had settled into my bones, not from fear, but from clarity. The kind of clarity that comes when there's nothing left to lose. I didn't sleep. I didn't need to. When the sun broke through the slats of the hotel blinds the next morning, I was already packed. A one-way train to D.C., a coat too thin for March, and a file that weighed heavier than any suitcase. It was 3 days after the brunch, 3 days since my family pretended I didn't exist. Now I was about to become impossible to ignore. The newsroom was nothing like the sleek glass offices I'd been forced to smile through for years. It was tucked between two bland government buildings, gray concrete, chipped paint, a barely there nameplate that simply read, Room 212. But inside, it was humming. Not with noise, but intent. Whiteboards crammed with dates and diagrams, walls littered with printed emails, photos circled in red, phones rang, keyboards clicked, coffee steamed in chipped mugs. There was no polished receptionist, no curated art, just truth being carved out, inch by inch. "Mariska?" a voice called from behind a high desk. I turned. The woman approaching looked like someone who'd spent her entire adult life in war zones, just not the kind you find on maps. Short gray hair, jacket slung over one shoulder, and eyes that didn't flinch. They called her C, but her real name was somewhere in footnotes and federal depositions. "I don't usually take meetings like this," she said, gesturing toward a back office. "But your file made me angry." That made two of us. We sat opposite each other at a battered oak desk. I pulled the manila folder from my tote, laying it flat like a doctor about to break bad news. It held more than just papers. It held versions of me they tried to bury. My name, ghosted from scholarship proposals, meeting minutes with blacked-out lines, an internal memo noting, "Shift credit to AR for optics." "They didn't just erase me," I said, voice even. "They built her career on my silence." C flipped through each page without blinking. When she reached the last sheet, she looked up slowly. "This company?" she said, tapping the logo. "We've been looking into them for over a year. Unpaid internships, exploitative board practices, donor fraud. But what you just gave me?" She tapped the folder again. "You gave me the why." She turned to the wall behind her, pulling down a laminated photo. I didn't expect the face she pointed to. Amelie's boss, of course, but right beside him, smiling at a long table, was my father. My stomach went still. "They know each other?" I asked. "They sat on a grant committee together for 6 years, she said. "He's in deeper than you think." There was a long pause. "You sure you want this published?" I didn't answer right away. I just stared at the photo, at the shape of my father's shoulders, the tilt of his head I knew too well. I remembered being 12 hearing him say, "Be quiet, Mariska. No one likes a girl who makes trouble." My phone buzzed on the table. It was Ethan. "I need to take this," I said quietly. C nodded, stepped out, closing the door behind her. "Hey," I answered. "You're there, aren't you?" His voice was calm but edged. "Yes." He was quiet for a beat. "Listen, if this story runs, it won't just be Amelie or her boss. It's going to drag everyone connected. That includes your father, maybe your mother. You know how DC works. Once they smell blood." "I know," I said, cutting him off. "Let it fall." He didn't argue. He just exhaled, like he'd known that was my answer all along. Back in the room, C was already typing. "Final headline?" she asked without turning around. I walked over, reading it off her screen. "How a nonprofit darling built an empire on family lies." "Too much?" she asked. No, I said. It's not enough, but it'll do. She leaned back in her chair. Any names you want kept out? That was the moment. The chance to shield someone. To be merciful. To play nice. I thought about my mother's last message. You embarrassed your sister. We raised you better. I thought about the way Amelie's voice curled when she said, You're just bitter. I thought about how none of them ever asked if I was okay. Nothing, I said. Let them see all of it. The newsroom dimmed slightly as the sun dipped lower in the sky. Outside, the city moved on like it always had. But inside that room, a different kind of countdown had begun. C set the story for publication. Monday, 7 a.m. sharp. As the screen locked, I turned toward the window. A couple walked by below, hand in hand, sipping coffee. Normal, safe. I didn't feel fear. I didn't feel regret. I felt something I hadn't tasted in years. Power. And across the city, champagne glasses froze midair as one headline detonated decades of deception. And just like that, the world moved. I sat in a quiet corner of a cafe across from my old high school, the kind of place with cracked leather booths and the same waitress who still called everyone on. Outside, the city stirred awake. Buses hissed at red lights, students clutched coffee cups like lifelines. But inside, something else pulsed. My phone screen glowed with headline after headline. The exposé had gone live an hour ago, and it was already trending at number 3 nationwide. How a nonprofit darling built an empire on family lies. I scrolled through the comments. This is disgusting. So this is where the donations went? How many people did they silence? There was no joy in me, no fist pump or smirk, just a quiet click in my chest, like a lock unlatched. I hadn't expected the sound of justice to be so still. Across the screen, I watched a clip someone posted outside Amelie's office. The camera shook as reporters swarmed the entrance like bees to syrup. Microphones thrust forward, questions barked like dogs. Is it true? Did you know about the labor violations? Why was your sister's name removed from board filings? I recognized the sidewalk. I used to walk past that building on my way to work, pretending I didn't notice her company's logo glowing above the doors. This morning, the letters looked dimmer. I sipped my lukewarm coffee and watched Amelie emerge from a black car. No makeup, no smile, just oversized sunglasses and a jaw clenched tight. She kept her head down, shoulders square like armor. Her assistant tried to shield her from cameras, but it was like trying to hold back a tide with a paper umbrella. Inside the building, things only got worse. An internal source, probably one of the interns who'd always been overlooked, leaked a second round of documents. This batch had names, dates, payouts. One memo showed direct orders to delete internal complaints from the HR logs. The board of directors didn't even make it through their emergency meeting before 2 federal agents showed up. One held a manila envelope. The other had a badge clipped to her blazer and a look that said, "No one's getting out clean." Back at the cafe, my phone buzzed with an alert from the news app. Breaking. Federal investigation launched into the Wildthorn Foundation. A woman 2 booths over gasped, "Isn't that the nonprofit that runs the women's shelter downtown?" Her friend nodded, scrolling. "It says the founder covered up labor abuse, and there's something about family ties." Oof! I looked away, out the window. A mother held her daughter's hand as they crossed the street. The little girl's backpack had a sparkly unicorn on it. I wondered what kind of world she'd grow up in. Maybe one where silence no longer passed as strength. By noon, Amelie had scheduled a press conference. It was held on the steps of a city building, flags waving stiffly in the wind. Cameras formed a wall. The crowd buzzed with anticipation. I didn't attend in person. I watched from my hotel room, curled up on the edge of the bed, laptop open, volume up. She stood at the podium, eyes shadowed, voice just shy of shaking. "There has been a lot of misinformation spread in the past 24 hours, she began, gripping the sides of the stand like it might float away. "But I want to clarify." That's when it happened. A voice from the crowd, clear, young, female, cut through the press mics. "Why did you erase your sister from everything?" The silence that followed was louder than any accusation. Amelie blinked. For a moment, she looked right at the camera. not like a public figure, like a little girl caught in a lie with no way out. Someone else shouted, "She built that clinic, we know. Why'd you take her name off?" Reporters pivoted, recording phones lifted high. Amelie opened her mouth, closed it. Her lips trembled around syllables that never formed. The clip went viral within minutes. Commentators dissected it frame by frame. "Watch her eyes," one said on a live stream. "That's guilt. That's not strategy. That's collapse." She walked off the podium halfway through her statement, flanked by aides who looked like they wanted to disappear into the sidewalk. I stared at the screen long after the feed cut out. I must have replayed the moment a dozen times. But not to gloat, not even to confirm what I already knew. I watched because something inside me needed to hear the silence that, for once, wasn't mine. That silence used to hang over our kitchen table like fog. When I was 15 and asked why Amelie always got the new clothes. When I was 20 and found out she'd been listed as sole founder of the clinic I helped build brick by brick. When I was told to smile at her engagement party and don't make a scene. Now the silence was on them. I closed my laptop slowly, took a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. This wasn't over. Not yet. But something had shifted. The weight had moved. For the first time, I wasn't the one carrying it alone. But justice wasn't just about the headlines. It was about facing them, one by one. And sometimes, the most deafening confrontation came not in courtrooms or press conferences, but over the phone, in the hush of your own kitchen. The morning after the story went viral, I woke up later than usual. Not from comfort, but from exhaustion. The kind that settles deep in your bones when you finally let go of pretending. My apartment was quiet. No TV humming, no traffic noise bleeding through the curtains. Just me, wrapped in an old cardigan, staring at the blinking red light on my phone. 32 missed calls. 20 from unknown numbers, probably reporters or board members. 6 from Amelie. 1 from the old landline at my mother's house, and 1 voicemail. That one. I hesitated before pressing play. I already knew the tone. Tight, clipped. The voice of someone not calling to understand, but to accuse. "Mariska," my mother began no greeting. "You embarrassed us. I don't know how you could do this to your sister. Whatever your issues are, this was cruel. You've ruined her career, our name. I raised you better than this." So, then silence. No mention of the evidence. No hint of the truth. Just her disappointment that I didn't stay quiet and keep the family's shame swept neatly under the rug. I stared at the wall for a while, her words ringing in my ears like an old hymn I no longer believed in. I didn't cry, not because it didn't hurt, but because some wounds stop bleeding when they turn to scar. And this one, this lifelong, invisible gash, had been forming since childhood. A knock on the door pulled me out of my haze. It was soft, familiar. "Mariska? It's me." Aunt Delphine, my father's sister. She stood in the hallway holding 2 paper bags and a small bouquet of tulips. No camera crews, no lectures, just her and that quiet gaze that always made me feel more like a person than a role. "I thought you might not have eaten," she said simply, stepping inside without judgment, setting the bags down in my kitchen. I didn't even have to ask how she found out. Everyone knew by now. But instead of launching into questions or condolences, she reached into the bag, pulled out a peach cobbler in a foil tray, and started unpacking it like she'd done it 100 times. We sat in silence for a minute. It wasn't awkward. It was full. She finally looked up from pouring tea. "It wasn't your job to protect them by disappearing." My breath caught. Just that one sentence cracked something in me, because that's what it always was, wasn't it? Disappearing, making myself smaller, palatable, convenient. She placed her hand over mine, her grip firm. "Your father, before he passed, he tried to set some things aside for you. College money, part of the house sale, a bond he didn't trust the others with. But Amelie, she intervened during probate, said you didn't need it." I closed my eyes, jaw tight. I didn't need it. Like I didn't need to be invited, didn't need to be seen, didn't need to exist. Delphine didn't elaborate. She didn't have to. Her presence was enough. That, and the fact she was here, when no one else was. After she left, I started cleaning. Not out of obligation, but clarity. Wiping counters, folding the throw blanket, straightening picture frames. When I moved an old stack of journals, a thin book slipped from the pile. A copy of Corduroy, the children's book Dad used to read to me. Inside, tucked like a forgotten treasure, was a photo. I stopped breathing. It was us, our family, before everything cracked. I was maybe 9, and for once I was in the center, smiling, bright-eyed, like I believed I belonged. I placed the photo on my mantle, no frame, just there, visible, a soft declaration. For years, I thought healing meant reconciliation, that someone would finally say, "We're sorry, we see you now." But maybe healing is something quieter. Maybe it starts with seeing yourself. I opened my laptop, hands steady. Not for Facebook, not to email Amelie, but for something else. I typed slowly, deliberately. To whom it may concern, I am writing to formally request the legal process to restore the founding rights and naming authority over the foundation known previously as. My legacy wasn't a reaction anymore. It wasn't revenge, it was redirection. I would rebuild, but not for them, not even to prove anything. Just to take back what should never have been erased. And I'd do it without asking for a seat at a table that was never built with me in mind. I didn't need an invitation to exist. I was already home. And yet tonight, I walked through a set of tall glass doors that once felt like a barricade. Same hotel, same chandelier dripping from the ballroom ceiling. But this time, I wasn't the afterthought or the misplaced name on a guest list. I was the keynote speaker. A volunteer offered me a small clipboard to confirm details for my introduction. I nodded, barely glancing at the paper. My heels clicked softly as I crossed the foyer, every sound echoing louder in my head than in the room. The scent of vanilla and polished wood felt oddly familiar. So did the way people's gazes shifted when I passed. But tonight, it wasn't pity or curiosity. It was respect. I didn't crave it. But I'd earned it. Ms. Delaney, a woman in a sleek navy dress, approached with a warm smile. "We are honored to have you tonight. The board can't stop talking about your foundation's work in Baltimore." I shook her hand and gave the kind of practiced, calm smile that came not from charm school, but from learning how to survive being overlooked. As I made my way inside the ballroom, the music dimmed, conversation softened, and that's when I saw her, Amelie, tucked near the back, away from the central tables, alone. Her hair was shorter, face thinner. The way she clutched her wine glass told me everything before she even opened her mouth. She didn't spot me right away, but her former boss did, the one who once pretended I didn't exist as he showered praise on her. He stepped toward me with the same smug half-smile I remembered from the wedding a year ago. "Quite a crowd again," he said, swirling his glass. "Though I suppose this time you're not just attending." His tone dripped with faux charm, the kind that makes your skin itch before your mind even catches up. I didn't flinch, didn't even stop walking. I looked straight ahead, then said quietly, just loud enough for those nearby to hear, "Funny. Last time I was invisible in this room, yet today you all can't look away." He blinked. A beat passed, then another. No one laughed. No one clinked glasses. The silence wasn't awkward. It was reverent. Even those who didn't know the full story seemed to feel it. The air in the room had shifted, not because I raised my voice, but because I didn't have to. I moved toward the stage while he lingered behind, suddenly irrelevant. The lights dimmed. The host gave a short welcome, and then my name was called. As I stepped up, I didn't look for my family. I knew they weren't there, and I didn't need them to be. I stood before hundreds, business leaders, donors, strangers, and spoke about rebuilding from silence, about the way women, especially the ones no one expects anything from, carry generations of weight just to be allowed a seat. I didn't name names. I didn't call out the lies. I didn't need to. Never wait for someone to hand you your worth, I said slowly, voice steady. Claim it, protect it, and never ever apologize for surviving. There was no applause break, no dramatic swell of music, just stillness, the kind that wraps around the truth and holds it like a prayer. When I stepped down, people stood, not to cheer, but out of something quieter, deeper. After the gala, as I made my way toward the exit, a young woman tapped my arm. She looked about 20, nervous and clutching a program folded in half. "I saw what you did," she said softly. "Thank you. I thought I was the only one." I smiled. "You're not anymore." We exchanged no numbers, no promises, just truth. Outside, the air was crisp, early spring, the kind of cool that makes you breathe deeper. I didn't call a car right away, just walked, past hedges trimmed too perfectly, past the valets trying not to stare. I walked because I could, because I wanted to. And as I reached the quiet street behind the venue, I let the night fold around me. They tried to bury me under silence, but I turned their silence into a stage, and I only needed one sentence to take it all back.